All right, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those in the East Coast. I am waiting a minute or two so we have people trickling in. And then we have our amazing speaker today, Terrell, and he's gonna kick it off. We'll give everybody maybe another minute for folks to join and we'll get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Awesome. It is good to see everyone.
Very nice, very nice. I see more folks joining, so maybe we wait another 30 seconds and then Terrell, I'll let you
Okay.
take it over.
That sounds great to me.
Perfect. Oh, and by the way, if you have questions, feel free to put them on the chat or on the Q&A button at the bottom, and then we'll go through them as we have time. We'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. But if something is pressing and urgent and you need an answer right now, then you can post it as Terrell speaks.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right, I think we're ready to get started. We have a good crew that have joined us. So,
All right, let's go for it.
good. All right, so take it away, Terrell. I'll let you introduce yourself. So we're very happy to have Terrell. He's a celebrity. He's a rock star. He has like 10 different podcasts. He's a consultant. He helps law firms. He's a CPA. He's a rock star, and I would like him to make his own introduction because he's pretty famous in this in this environment.
So I would say thank you for having me. The slide too, I'm gonna go through kind of my background, but one of the things I want to get a good feel for is who is in attendance. So I would say, can you guys help me? Let's test the chat. And I would say is if you can put in the chat like where you're tuning in from or like what your role is as it pertains to the law firm, kind of what role you play, because it's always good to get a good context on who's in the audience and who we're speaking to. So if you can drop that into the chat button and we'll keep an eye on it. And if you see me looking at different screens, it's because we're trying to keep an eye on the chat as well as do the presentation as well. But while you're dropping that information in the chat, today we're going to talk about a topic that I talk a lot about is understanding KPIs. And I think it's a very important topic and I mean, very timely because I recently, oh, it looks like the chat is disabled. Any way we could turn that on for them? Um, Thank you for pointing that out. It is good to know. Um, but just to give some context on why this topic is quite important to me is because we recently, my team and I, we did this fun exercise where we actually took law firm KPIs and we actually did a March Madness bracket to where we started with like 66 different law firm KPIs. And we went through the process of kind of matching them up and seeing, okay, all right, who would make it to the Sweet 16, who would make it to the Elite Eight, down to the Final Four, and I find that a lot of people really enjoyed when I did the podcast and I talked about these KPIs and how we went through that process and why these KPIs are relevant. And so I think it is very, very relevant for everyone who is joining for the conversation today. Now, to give you context on who I am, my background is accounting and finance. I am a CPA, and I founded and currently am the CEO of an accounting firm where we do accounting for solo and small law firms. And then we also provide CFO services and data analytics for law firms as well. And then for larger law firms, we do education and training of law firm staff because one of the things that all of you have probably experienced in some form or fashion is that the the role that you're probably in leadership within the law firm is you probably weren't trained, you didn't go to school to do it, and a lot of times what I found is a lot of people in legal administration end up evolving into the role, or maybe you went to law school to be a lawyer, and now you're trying to run a practice, and now you're trying to support a law firm, or maybe you're in a practice management role and you're trying to help lawyers kind of navigate the organizational or business side of running a law firm. And so that's where we do a lot of education and training of really our kind of motto and goal is that we aim to make accounting and finance less complicated for law firms and those in law firm leadership. Also, I create a lot of content as far as hosting multiple podcasts within the legal space. One of the really fun ones that we're doing right now is called Law Firm Success, and it's where I get to sit down with law firm owners, partners, and also law firm leadership, and just talk about like one success story in their firm. Some of them talk about the growth that they're doing. Some of them talk about the impact that they're having in the community. And I let them define what they consider to be a success story. And we just come on and we talk about it. And for me, it becomes a great way of learning more about what law firms care about. And also, it becomes a great way for me to then take some of the tips that I'm hearing other law firms success with and actually sharing that with others. Because like I said, we host a podcast called Law Firm and Finance, where I share break down finance concepts for law firms and law firm leaders to really understand how to look at that side of their firm. And then the last thing that I'll put on here is I will tell you that my wife and I do not have any children yet, but I do have at this point between my brothers and my wife's siblings, there are 25 nieces and nephews. And so every now and then they often wonder what I do. And sometimes they want to have input in some of these presentations or speeches that I give. And one of the things that they asked me to put on my presentations is that you should include in your bio that you're the bestest uncle in the world. So for my nieces and nephews, I always include that in there because that is a title that they gave me. So that's part of my job in their opinion. So I always like to include that. Now to give, I guess, were we able to figure out the chat or do I need to keep my
The
eye on the?
chat is unable to get, I'm sorry, I don't know why it's disabled, but folks are
Okay.
typing in their answers in the Q&A.
Okay.
So I
Perfect.
can, do you want me to go through a little bit?
Nope. I can take. I can open up the Q&A. All right. So if
Okay.
we're looking at the Q&A, it looks like we got some people from PI firms in Detroit, some people in consulting. We got Ohio CFOs from Ohio. We have Boston, Denver, Kentucky, multi-state practice management support. We have, looks like, I'm guessing that is Kansas. So we have a really good group, AR managers, operations managers. So we have a mix of different types of professionals who are here. So my job will be is how do we blend and make this relevant across the board? So we are going to do just that. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is why the topic of KPIs, why this topic even matters. And one of the things that I have learned is whenever you step into any level of leadership within a law firm, is although you may have been hired where your job description says you do one thing, for example, let's say the CFO, the person who was hired to be a CFO, inevitably that tends to mean you're going to get involved in other areas of the business as well. And none of us have the benefit of being able to just do one role in a firm and to be able to just put our blinders on and just say, hey, I am not going to look at anything else. I'm just going to focus on the one thing I was hired for. And that's just not a reality for anyone who's working in a law firm, especially when you're on the administrative side. We do have to have a decent knowledge and a good breadth of understanding about many different areas within the law firm. And so the way I tend to think about KPIs is that KPIs are a great way to help you understand what is going on across the business. is you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer to understand what's going on the operations side. You don't necessarily have to be on the in HR to understand what's going on in HR. The KPIs can be ways that help you understand it. And even if, let's say, you're an accountant, or let's say if you're not an accountant and you're trying to figure out what's going on as far as, the finance side of the law firm, like those are areas that, like I say, if we're using KPIs, they will help us understand them pretty quickly. So the thing that I always tell people is that the ways that KPIs tend to help, and I am not going to read every word that's on this slide, but the things that I want to focus on is when it comes down to KPIs, and I will explain later on like what KPIs are and go in a little bit more detail. But KPIs, they help you understand, they help you navigate, they help you predict, they help you get perspective, they give you guidance, and I think very importantly, KPIs do help you celebrate your progress. Now, I know that that's probably not a term that you're going to hear, or a phrase you're going to hear accountants or CFOs talk about as much as I have worked with law firms and running an accounting firm myself, and also I'm the chair of the law firm finance committee within the American Bar Association. So I talk to hundreds and hundreds of law firms every single year. And one of the things that I find to be a challenge and somewhat of an issue at times is most of them don't know when they're actually doing well. And that's the thing that KPIs help you understand. It helps you understand kind of where are you in the journey in relation to your goal. Because a lot of times, firms are experiencing burnout, or people are exhausted, or people feel like things are worse than they really are. For example, like I started working with a smaller firm, reached out to us some time ago. And when they reached out to us, they were in a pretty bad shape because they had just gone through a point where that firm, they were following some strategy of some other consultants had given them, and they were at a point where that firm was losing they lost $700,000 in 1 year. Now, when you're a firm and you're losing $700,000, like money has to come from somewhere to cover that loss. And we really started digging in. And one of the things that, we were, after working with us for about 6 months, they were just saying, like, I really don't feel like I'm making progress and things like that. And so what we did is we sat down and I taught them, like, okay, let's really look at the KPIs and the numbers. And when we really started to look at the numbers, what we realized is by implementing some of the strategies we shared with them, they had gone from losing about $700,000 to now they were seeing a positive profit of about $40,000 a month. Now, it may not have felt like a really big change because they still were kind of working out of a hole. But by being able to look at the KPI, it's like, hey, we can celebrate the progress that we're making because now we know we're headed in the right direction. Because if we just consistently stay at this path, meaning like, hey, everybody's getting paid, the bills are getting taken care of, and we also have a bottom line profit of $40,000 a month, I'm like, that is a big change from losing $700,000 the previous year. And it wasn't until we kind of broke down the numbers that they realized, like, you know what? Maybe there is something to be able to celebrate. Maybe there is something that we should be thinking about. And I always say is the numbers are there not only to help hold you accountable and keep you in line, but they're also there to help you celebrate. So what are we going to do today? Because we have a limited time, I am going to, we're going to we're going to condense this down a little bit because what I want to do is I want to share what I call a smart number framework with you, because for a lot of the people that are here, maybe the issue is that they are new to the finance side or new to the accounting side of running or being involved with leadership within a law firm. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down, I'm going to give you kind of the framework that I usually give people as we're kind of making it through the process of as I'm trying to train people on, hey, how do you understand and simplify the finance side of running a law firm? So we're going to go through the smart number framework. We're going to go through kind of identifying critical KPIs because a lot of times people struggle with, hey, what KPIs really matter? And I'm going to walk you through a process and we're going to walk through some examples on, hey, here's an example of how we can identify, like, hey, what KPIs really matter? And then kind of really talk through how do you use the KPIs to develop a roadmap and a practical strategy for actually making a change. And it looks like the chat is now working. So I always say is if you have questions, do not wait until the end. Just go ahead and drop your questions in now. And I'll keep an eye on the chat to make sure we kind of work those questions in because I don't want anyone to forget their question. So I would say is ask it as it comes to mind, and then we'll make sure we work it in. All right. So for this smart numbers framework, so the point of this framework is how do you start to really understand what's going on the finance side? Because as I said, most people who go into finance side or understanding KPIs at all, they usually don't have experience with it in the past. Or they say, hey, I'm not a numbers person, or hey, math is not my thing, which are all things that I usually hear people say. So the way I tend to think about it, I use a framework called ACE. And first part is one is we need to look at, okay, do you have access? And then the second one is the data structured for comprehension? And then the third one is, are there explanations? So let's walk through that kind of piece by piece. The first one, when it comes down to access, if you're trying to understand what is going on the finance side of a law firm, the first question I'm going to ask you is, do you have access to the right set of information? Do you have access to the right reports? And some of those common reports, which there may be more depending on the specific thing you're trying to understand, but some of the common reports are going to be like your profit and loss statement, or you may hear it often called a income statement, or for short, you might hear it called a P&L. Also, there may be the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. And the way that I think about this is what the profit and loss tells us is how much money are we earning from the legal services that we provide? Like how much money are we earning? And in some cases, maybe like how much are we actually collecting from the customers who we sent the bill to and they've actually paid for their bill. So how much money do we have coming in from the legal work that we're doing? And then it also helps you get an idea on what are we spending that money on? Like what are our expenses? And then once you kind of take your revenue or the income minus the expenses, the bottom line tells us, okay, out of all the money that came in, how much of it do we get to keep, or is there a profit after we have covered our expenses? And that's really what the profit and loss is going to tell you. Now, the balance sheet, on the other hand, I will say is not every firm spends a lot of time on the balance sheet, but what the balance sheet does tell you is it's kind of broken down into three parts, like your assets, your liabilities, and then your owner's equity. So assets are whatever the firm owns, like how much money is in your bank account. If the firm actually owns like the building or vehicles that they have, and those types of things. And then on the liability side, it's, how much is the outstanding balance on the credit card? Does the firm have any outstanding loans, whether that is loans to a third party, or sometimes some of the partners may loan money to the business if the business is kind of working through a cash crunch. So you may have those types of things in kind of the liabilities of who do you owe money to. Also with some of the vendors that you may have, like if there's a vendor that you use, let's say for your software, or if there are, let's say third party companies that you've used, maybe like a court reporter or something like that, where the invoice goes into the system, but you haven't paid them yet. That means, hey, it's going to sit as a liability because we need to pay them at some point. Like we know they provided a service, we'll need to pay them. It just hasn't happened yet. And then the bottom section of a balance sheet is really what's left over. So if you take your assets, what you own, minus your liabilities, what you owe, the owner's equity is going to be what's left over after, you subtract those two numbers. Now, the cash flow statement is one that I don't think enough people spend time on. But with the cash flow statement, it's really going to tell us how is cash moving in and out of your business. And that becomes a very, very important one because, you may have a situation where the business is profitable depending on like how you do your accounting. Like the business could be profitable but still be cash poor. And so understanding the cash flow really helps us kind of see, all right, how is money moving in and out? And then when it comes down to like your trust reconciliation, I will say is if you are not fully, I guess you say, understanding what trust reconciliation or the rules around trust account, I would say you definitely need to educate yourself on that because this is a very serious matter that I've seen a lot of firms get into trouble with because they were not properly managing their trust. And or some people may call it an IALTA account. And really what it is money that the firm is holding that belongs to the client. So in theory, clients may pay in advance for the work that the firm is going to do, and the firm holds on to the money until the work is performed. But there may be situations where the client comes back and says, hey, we no longer need your legal services. And in theory, you should be prepared to be able to give them whatever is left in their trust account, be able to return it to them. And so you do want to make sure that there's some type of reconciliation there. The other one that I don't think a lot of law firms do spend enough time on is accounts receivable. Now, accounts receivable becomes very, very important because that is the money that your clients owe you. I would say many, many times I talk to law firms, and one of the issues that we run into is that they have done the legal work. They may or may not have sent the invoice, but even after they send the invoice, if the client doesn't pay right away, or if the client didn't have enough money in their trust account to cover the invoice, the question I always ask is, what is your process for following up on the people who haven't paid you yet? And so one of the things that's important for you in leadership to do is to make sure, do you have access to see who still owes the firm money? Do you have access to see the accounts receivable report? And the accounts payable report, we talked a little bit about that. That's who do you owe money to? Because that becomes very, very important for you to kind of understand, like, where is the state of the business? And between these statements, you can find a lot of the key information that you need to really manage the performance of the firm. So the second part of this smart number framework is comprehension. So now that we know we have access to the right reports and we know, hey, what basic reports we need, the question we should be asking ourselves is, okay, do I actually understand what I am looking at? Because it's not enough to just be able to say, yeah, I can access the report. I know how to go in the system and out or pull the report. The question we want to ask ourselves is, when you look at it, do you actually understand it? Like, can you comprehend what it is telling you? Because the way that I look at any type of report is that every report is actually telling you a story. But the thing is, if you don't know how to understand or interpret that story, then it's not going to be very useful for you. Whenever I'm going in to work with a new law firm, or maybe it's a law firm I've worked with in the past, the first thing I want to look at is I want to find out, like, what is your goal, how you feel about what's going on, and then I want to actually look at the numbers because I want to see, are the financial reports telling the same story that you are telling me? Because there have been many firms that I've come in where they tell me, hey, I feel like things are going great. And then I look at the finances and I'm like, well, these KPIs don't tell me the same story. Like, these KPIs tell me things are not so great. And so you do want to make sure that, hey, can you actually understand the information? Now, part of being able to comprehend what's in the information is how the data is structured. So here's what I would say. Because I have an example of walking through like what a chart of account is. So I'm going to skip down to the cash flow and we'll circle back to the chart of account. So when it comes down to the cash flow statement, what the cash flow statement is really going to tell you, as I said before, how money is coming in and going out of the business. Where there's three kind of key areas where that happens. There's the operating activity or operations, which is all of the normal stuff of conducting business. So the way money comes in for operations is you provide the legal services, clients pay their invoices. That's how money comes in. Money goes out because you're paying all the expenses, the normal operation of the business. But when it comes down to financing activity, that may be, hey, maybe the way you're bringing money into the business is the firm is taking out loans or the firm is financing different things with debt, or maybe the firm is paying off those loans. So that's how money comes in and out from the financing activity. And then from the investing activity, this is where are the partners having to put money into the firm? And one of the things that you do want to ask yourself is, hey, if I look at the bank account and I see that, hey, we have X amount of dollars in the bank account. Some people look at that and they celebrate like, yeah, we're good to go. We have this much money in the bank account. But the cash flow statement, it helps me understand, where did that money come from? Did it come from your normal operations? Or did you have to go get loans to get that cash? Or did your partners have to take money out of their personal bank account and put it into the business? Because if most of your cash is constantly coming from financing activity or from investing activity, then I would probably say that your business is probably not as healthy as you think it is, because at some point, banks are going to stop giving you money, or at some point, the partners aren't going to have as much money to keep dumping money into the business. So the optimal thing that you want is you want your most of your cash that is funding your business, you want it to come from your operations, because what that means is that means you're providing a legal service that people are paying for and you're managing your normal expenses very well. Now, the other area or way of understanding when it comes down to accounts receivable and accounts payable, I tend to look at it as an aging schedule. So one of the things that I like to do with firms is look at your accounts receivable. And most firms are probably not on a accrual accounting basis, like meaning they're doing their accounting based off money that hits the bank account. So one of the things you can do is to go into your practice management software, and what you can do is you can pull all of your unpaid invoices. And the thing you want to kind of look at is to see how old are these invoices? Like, is it 30 days past due? Is it 60 days past due? Is it 90 days past due? Because that becomes very, very important to look at. Because I will tell you, in general, the older the numbers get, or the older an invoice gets, the harder it is for you to collect it. So one of the things that you do want to look at on a regular basis is looking at your accounts receivable aging on a regular basis, because you want to make sure that, hey, we aren't letting unpaid invoices sit out there very long. And sometimes what you may notice is that sometimes your clients, they may have, changed their email address, or they may not check that email, or if your clients are other businesses, sometimes the person who was in that role before is no longer in that role. So you might be sending the invoices to an email that isn't as active, or someone who's no longer there. So a lot of times when you look at your aging, it could be a simple sign of just saying, hey, maybe I need to pick up the phone and call to make sure they got my invoice. Because if you allow it to continue to age and the older it gets, the harder it's going to be for you to collect it. And I will say is most law firms are trying to manage the relationship with their clients. When you have to send an invoice to collections, I will tell you it is not the best relationship for your client. I guess the attorneys who are working on the case, it usually doesn't make the best relationship when you have to send them to collection. So you do want to have a practice on like, hey, are we looking at this on a regular basis? And the similar concept with your accounts payable is you want to see how old are these things, because when it's accounts payable, you're on the other side. You owe someone else money. You don't want to be holding on to their money too long because it may have a negative impact on their business, or it may impact how you're able to continue doing business with them. So you do want to look at your aging there. So back to what I was talking about with the chart of account. So what I did here, and as you can see, these are very hypothetical numbers, just for confidential purposes. The way I tend to look at this is I know that there are probably whatever accounting system or accounting processes you are using or you're used to using in the past or in the present, that there are probably a lot more accounts in your profit and loss or in your financial statements. But when it comes down to trying to communicate that information to the partners, or when it comes down to trying to communicate that information to the legal team, a lot of time what I find to be very, very helpful is to actually summarize some of your chart of accounts. Like, they don't need to see every single line item to really understand the big picture, because again, the thing that you're trying to help them understand is, what is the story here? Like, what's the overall story that that the numbers are telling us? And a lot of times you can condense things down into a much simpler view. And what I will tell you is, if you can condense it down to one page, it will probably help you get your message across to the partners a lot easier, or getting your message across to the decision makers in the law firm a lot easier, is if you can condense and probably group some things together. Because what this allows you to do is it allows you to quickly see, okay, all right, how much money are we spending on facilities and utility costs, or how much money are we spending on dues and subscriptions, or our vehicle costs and stuff? By being able to group it together, it makes it so much easier for you to be able to see it. And so that's why I say is that the smart number framework is the second part, is about making sure the information is presented in a way that you can comprehend it. Now, the last part is really the explanation. So if you're really going to understand the numbers and use kind of the smart number framework, now that we've clarified you have access to the right reports, the reports are structured in a way that you can actually comprehend and understand. The next part is explanations. And so explanations most of the time come in when we're comparing two different numbers. Like, we may be comparing, okay, what happened this period versus what happened last period. Or we may be comparing what happened this period compared to what we budgeted and expected to happen. When you are comparing two different numbers, the key questions you do want to start asking yourself is, okay, all right, what is the story here? Like, if we expected revenue to be, $300,000 this week, well, if revenue actually came in at 250,000, like, why? Can we explain what happened? And can we explain it in a simple way? And if you aren't able to do that, then I would probably say we need to spend a little bit more time understanding, why are the numbers what they are? Because if you're going to be able to use the numbers to actually make business decisions, you got to kind of understand the story behind it. And one of the things that I kind of use as a kind of standard myself is, if I can't explain it to other people in a way that they understand, then I probably don't fully understand it myself. And so the question you should be asking yourself is, when you look at the financials and you look at your financial reports, is, can you actually explain that, or how well can you explain it to someone else? If you don't feel very confident and comfortable in being able to explain it, then you should probably ask yourself, okay, all right, where do I need to spend some more time to make sure I understand? And for example, when it comes down to explaining why we didn't achieve the revenue that we expected, a lot of times it's having a conversation with the legal team. It's probably going to be a couple factors. Is did we not have the right number of clients that we expected? Or hey, did we not get enough of the legal work that we expected to get done? Or is this a productivity problem? Where you can start to look into those things, because if you're trying to communicate this information to the partners, that's the type of stuff the partners want to know, because the partners don't just want to know, like, hey, yeah, you set this pretty report on my desk. The partners want to know, like, what does this mean? Or, hey, who do I need to go have a conversation with? Or how does this information, how is it going to impact the future decisions that we need to make in the firm? Because if you're able to provide explanations at that level, that is when all of your numbers start to become more smart numbers, meaning numbers that will help you make smart decisions in your business. And again, the big point of all of these reports is that they're going to help tell a story. And the question you need to ask yourself is, do I understand the story behind the numbers? Now, I would say that's the smart number framework. Now, I want to spend the rest of the time really talking about KPIs and talking to a couple examples. And so I hear a lot of people talk about KPIs a lot. And I hear a lot of people often saying, like, hey, what KPIs matter? And a lot of times I think it gets very confusing because we've kind of forgotten, or we've used the word KPI so much that we haven't really taken a step back to understand, like, what is a KPI? Because when someone asks me, what KPI should I be monitoring? The best answer that I can give you is, well, it depends. And the reason why it depends is because a KPI is not just some random number on a page. A KPI really does come down to, like, I need to understand what is important to you. I need to understand kind of like, what performance are we trying to measure? And then I also need to kind of understand, like, no, okay, where are you trying to go? Because when you think about KPIs, the real point of KPIs is that they are supposed to be key performance indicators, meaning they tell me what is important, they tell me how you're doing in certain areas, and they help point you in the right direction. So before I can tell you what KPIs you should be monitoring, the first thing I need to know is, well, where do you want to go? Like, what is your goal? And so a lot of times when firms come to me and like, hey, well, what are the top KPIs? The first thing you need to tell me is, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Because a lot of times, firms will come and say, hey, well, we want to be more profitable. So if I help you make $1 more this year than you did last year, would that be sufficient? And most people would probably say, well, no, we want to do more than that. So I'm like, okay, then let's just be clear. What is it that you are trying to achieve? Because the KPIs that matter to you are going to be based on your goal. And the way that I tend to think about it is, let's say if you and I were going to take a road trip somewhere, and you asked me to tell you how to get there, or you asked me, hey, what road sign should we pay attention to? I'm like, well, it depends on where the destination is. Because if I'm located in Dallas, Texas, and you tell me that you want to go to New York, then me telling you what signs are in Arizona, what signs are in California are not going to be very helpful for you, because that is not in the direction of the goal that you are trying to achieve. And so a lot of times I do find that those who are in, legal leadership are often asked, like, hey, what KPIs should we be following? Or, hey, can you provide us an update on KPIs? The first question you need to ask the leadership team is, hey, what is our goal? Where are we headed? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Because once you know that, then you can kind of go through this process of really finding the right KPIs for your firm. Because the way I tend to look at it is, first, let's define the goal. After we define the goal, the next thing that we want to do is we want to identify the drivers. Like, what are the things that will impact whether or not we will be successful at the goal that we're trying to achieve? And then after we identify the drivers, we really want to pick, okay, all right, we have a couple options. how do we pick the path that we want to choose? Because the reality of it is not every strategy you pick is going to actually work out. Like one of the most common ones is, let's say a firm says, "Hey, we want to grow the market share of our law firm." Well, one of the ways you grow the market share is you can either do it by size of revenue, or you can either do it by the number of clients that you support. So I'm like, there's a couple ways for you to achieve the goal of increasing market share. At some point, we have to decide which path are we going to take to achieve that goal. And if you go back to the similar analogy of taking a road trip, I mean, if you're trying to drive from Dallas, Texas, which for those that may not be as familiar with geography of Dallas, Texas, is kind of in the middle of the United States. If you're trying to go from there to New York, which is in the Northeast, there's a couple different routes that you can take. There isn't just one road or one way to get there. And there's a couple different modes of transportation that you can take. And so you kind of got to figure out like, where are we going? Like, what kind of path do we want to take? And then the next thing that I think is very, very important is you do want to clarify like, what are the milestones? Because whatever trip you are taking, there are going to be certain stops along the way. Because if it's a valuable goal, like if it's a worthwhile goal that you are trying to achieve, you're not going to get there overnight. Chances are you're going to get piece by piece, or you're going to make gradual progress over time. Because I will say is, if you can achieve your goal overnight, chances are your goal was probably way too small. So you do want to start thinking about, to make KPIs very functional, is you want to ask yourself, what are the incremental stages that we're going to go through to achieve this? For example, when it comes down to increasing market share, let's say if you wanted to increase, the law firm wanted to increase its market share by 35%. Well, okay, some of the milestones we're going to hit, at some point we're going to hit 5%. Some point we're going to hit 10 or 15 or 20, 25. Like there are going to be different mile markers along the way. And one of the things that helps you stay on track as a firm is to say, well, hey, if our goal this year is to grow by 35%, by the end of April, where should we be? Should we be at 5% by the end of April? Should we be at 10%, 15%? Like, what is our target at the end of April? And then maybe we say, hey, what should our target be by July or by September? Because if you understand those milestones, it will help you understand, like, are we going the right direction? And unfortunately, a lot of people, when it comes down to setting out goals, they don't tend to implement milestones. So what ends up happening is they're just hoping that they end up at the right destination, and they don't know how to read the signs along the way to say, hey, yes, I'm headed the right way. And then the last part that I would say is you do want to conduct regular reviews. And this is where I think people do themselves a disservice, because they've gone through the point of, they've defined what their goal was. They spent all this time. They did a team offsite meeting, talk about what their goals were. They identified the drivers, like, here are the things that we know we need to do, or here are the things we can do to achieve that goal. They picked the path and the strategy that they want to use. And then they've clarified, here's what the milestones are. But when they go back to actually doing the work throughout the year, no one gets together and says, hey, how are we doing in relation to our goal? Like, what did we actually do this month? What did we expect to do this month? And how did we actually do? And that's where that variance conversation comes into play. And so you do have to ask yourself, is like, okay, how often am I having those reviews? So I want you to put into the chat for how often do the KPI reviews happen at your firm? And I'm very curious, like, how often the teams are getting together to actually have those conversations to say, how are our KPIs looking? So I would say, now that the chat is open, drop in the chat, like, how often are you actually looking at those KPIs? And then I will say also is the important thing for you to think about as you're doing those reviews is you also want to ask yourself, is like, are the right people who should be in those conversations actually present. Because what I found a lot of times in different meetings, or there may be a KPI that someone on the team owns, but when the reviews are happening, that person isn't in the room. And so it's very difficult for you to hold people accountable if the right people aren't part of the conversation. Because the point of that conversation is not so much just to check the box. The point of that conversation is to actually have a productive conversation, to ask questions, to challenge people, to say, hey, where are we with this? What's going on? Like, what help do you need? What changes do we need to make? Because that review should spark some very healthy conversation. And in some cases, it might spark a little bit of debate about, hey, do we need to change our strategy? Or, hey, are we still focused on the right things for us to be successful? But if you don't have the right people in the room, then that's probably not going to happen. And then you also want to make sure you don't have the wrong people in the room, because not everybody needs to be part of every conversation. And I'm sure, all of us have had our share of meetings that we've been invited to that we were sitting there thinking, like, why am I in this meeting? Like, this doesn't seem to be very relevant. So you do want to do that when you're doing your regular reviews. You want to ask yourself, do we have the right people in the room? Now, the rest of this, I want to walk through an example. And so let's say this hypothetical example, this firm wants to increase their revenue by 25% year over year. So the first thing we need to understand is, what was your revenue last year? And so let's say in this scenario, we're going to look at the legal cases that they supported. Based on looking at their history, we were able to do some calculation to understand, hey, for every case that they support, here's about what their average case value was. And then we also want to look at their collections, because we want to see, okay, although you did the legal work, that doesn't mean you collected all the money. So let's say in this scenario, this firm has an 85% collection rate. So that's kind of how we figured out, like, okay, all right, last year, this firm did about $2.3 million in revenue. So if we wanted to grow the firm by 25%, we know that, hey, these are the three KPI, or these are the three drivers that are going to impact what our revenue looks like in the current year. So let's say in the current year, we know how many legal cases that they supported. We know what the average case value is. We know what the collection rate is. And let's say for the numbers that are on the screen, it comes out to 2.5 million. So what this quickly tells me is I can just do the simple math to say, hey, if this is how the firm plays out, you're not going to hit your 25% goal. You're only going to grow by 10%. So now we can have the productive conversation to say, all right, if we really want to achieve a 25% goal or growth year over year, what driver are we willing to change and improve in order to hit our goal? And it may be that, hey, maybe we need to get more cases. Maybe the types of cases we bring in, we need to start looking at a different type of clientele. Or maybe we need to go talk to our billing department and say, hey, we need to have a different goal as it relates to our collection activity, to make sure that we're billing staff or billing our clients, and we're following up on invoices. See, there's a number of different, I would say, drivers that we can move to really achieve that goal. So let's say we had the leadership meeting and we talked through it and we figured out, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on bringing in a couple more cases. We're going to focus on trying to work on higher value cases. And we're really going to push to increase the percent of our collections rate. Now, after, let's say this was the scenario we came up with. Now it's clear that, hey, if we follow this path, we execute this strategy well, we can achieve a 26% year over year growth. And so here you can clearly see in this very simple example of kind of how we use these KPIs to help us understand, what does our strategy need to look like if we're going to actually achieve the goal. Now, there are a ton of other KPIs that are relevant to the firm. But as I said before, if you really want to focus on, like, what are the key performance indicators we need to monitor, you need to start with what is my goal? And then how do I break it down to what is most important to the goal that I am trying to achieve? Now, when you're looking at scenarios like this, for example, let's say if we wanted to improve the payment collections rate, a couple of things that may come out as you start to have conversation, because this is going to probably be a combination of the billing team. It's probably also going to be a combination of the legal team, because one of the things that we've seen that impacts the collection rate is the legal team working on cases that we can actually get paid for? Because if you go back to what we talked about with the aged AR reports, if we see that there are some customers who are habitually late in making their payments, or there are some customers who are behind in making payments, maybe we need to go have a conversation with the legal team to say, hey, these 5 cases or these cases, we need to limit the amount of legal work that we're doing on these cases because they are not paying their bills. And unfortunately, a lot of firms usually struggle when it comes down to collections because they're spending their time on cases that they can't actually collect for. Now, I will tell you, you do want to make sure that it's not just a numerical thing. You do want to make sure that if you are going to adjust the amount of work that you're doing, you want to make sure that you are compliant with the ethics rules of your bar, because the bar association may have some limitations on how you are able to adjust the amount of legal work. So you do want to make sure that you're compliant with the ethics of your bar association. But from a leadership standpoint, that's one of the things that we can kind of monitor, and the KPIs that we can, and the feedback we can give to the legal team to say, hey, if I know that there are clients you're working on that aren't paying their bills, I can kind of give them that feedback. And so from that example, we kind of see, all right, we've gone through the process, we defined our goal, we identify what drivers are going to move the needle or move the results. We kind of picked out a path. Now it comes down to laying out kind of those milestones. So in this example, the way if we go back and said, hey, here's what our strategy is. We're going to focus on getting 200 cases. We know what our average case value needs to be. We know what our collections target needs to be in order for us to achieve our overall goal. So the next thing I want to do is, okay, how does this look as far as milestones? And so one of the things that I start to break down is, all right, if we know we need to get 200 clients, 200 cases, let me say, how many cases do we need in the first quarter? How many cases do we need in the second quarter? How many cases do we need in the third and the fourth quarter? Because this is how we break down those larger goals into very practical milestones. Because what we can do then is we can measure, how did we perform in the first quarter? What was our actual new clients or new cases versus what was our target supposed to be? And then we can do the same thing for the second quarter. Because what this does is it then gives us a clear signal. Are we still headed in the right direction? Because again, the KPIs or the key performance indicators are there to help you understand the important numbers that tell you how your performance is doing, and then they point in a direction to tell you, are we still headed in the right direction? Because if this was your scenario and you looked at it, you said, okay, the first quarter, we achieved our goal, what we actually exceeded the goal. In the second quarter, we didn't achieve our goal. So now we need to kind of understand, like, hey, what changes do we need to make in the third and the fourth quarter to make sure that we get back on track with our goal? And that's where the huge value comes in your role in legal administration is when you think about the goal that you're responsible for, how do you take that goal and how do you break it down into incremental pieces and then provide feedback to people about that goal? So it looks like we had a question come in. How do you differentiate KPIs from regular data points and metrics? So the way that I would answer that, the way I differentiate KPIs from regular data points is KPIs are the key performance indicators related to your goal. There are a ton of other data points that you are going to measure, but not all the other data points are directly related to the goal that you are trying to achieve. For example, if this firm is trying to grow by 25%, it's probably still a good one to measure is the utilization rate. But let's say if utilization rate isn't the most important indicator for you to monitor, you still want to know what your utilization rate is. It just may not be one of the key performance indicators that you're measuring. Because I do want to make it very clear is that when we are focused on what the KPIs are, that doesn't mean that we completely forget about all the other indicators. Those data points still are relevant, but the whole concept of a KPI is which ones are the most important compared to our goal. And those are the ones that we want to make sure that we keep front and center in front of everybody on a very continual basis. But you don't want to forget about the other data points because some of your other data points might actually be kind of a support to your KPIs. So the way that I think about KPIs and what I would say is kind of a best practice is your KPIs are going to be what are the real key, most important ones we want to keep front and center for people? Like, what are the ones that are directly related to the goal that you are trying to achieve? Now, different people within the organization will still have to monitor other data points, but the ones that you keep in front of people more frequently are going to be how are we doing on our key performance indicators? And so let's say for that same example, because we talked that we talked about where the goal would be is achieving a 90% collection rate. So again, you can break it down into milestones and say, hey, in the first quarter, what was our collection rate? In the second quarter, what was our collection rate? And we can kind of see how are we doing year to date? Like, are we on track with our goal? Or, hey, do we need to have a conversation with the billing team? Or do we need to have a conversation with the legal team about what changes need to be made in order for us to be able to stay on track? And so as we kind of come to a close, I mean, a few tips that I would give or practical tips on really working with KPIs is I always say is you do want to start simple. And I would say involve your accounting team because the numbers that are going to impact your KPIs, you're definitely going to need some information from the accounting team. And you'll probably need some other information as well, but you'll definitely need to involve your accounting team to give you feedback on those numbers and to kind of help you understand what the drivers are. And then if you have a CFO, I would say, have your CFO create some simple templates. For example, if you're in the billing department, like kind of break it down like this to see, hey, can the CFO help you create a simple template like this so you can track your performance? Were we green or were we red? And that way it gives you a signal on where you need to probably do some more research. And at a minimum, I would say set monthly review schedules, like actually put it on the calendar of, hey, here's when we're going to do the review. And then I think also just kind of test your assumptions because a lot of times if we're coming up with a strategy, you're going to have assumptions and you want to test those out to see if they make sense. And then I would say is KPIs can get very, very complicated if you let it because there can be numbers all over the place. And the reason why I say is coming back to keeping it simple because if it becomes complicated to track your KPIs or to discuss your KPIs, people will just stop talking about it. And so you do want to try to keep it as uncomplicated and simple as possible because the more complicated it becomes, people just won't talk about it. And then one of the things I've also included in here are some other examples of KPIs. There's some common KPIs that I put in here, some advanced ones. I also included my contact information as well. And then also, if people want to get a copy of this presentation, because I know we didn't go through the advanced and the common KPIs, you can actually go to our website and you can download this presentation for free. You go to our website, we'll let you download this copy for free and you can kind of revisit it as you like.
And we will share out the recording of this webinar as well in case you want to see it again, or if you could, folks that could make it, we always send it out.
Awesome. And I know we ran like literally like right up to 1 o'clock. I was, do we have any time for questions if anybody has some? I mean, I have a few more minutes.
Do you want to put the link again? There you go.
Yeah. So if you go to
Thanks.
our website, it's tlturnergroup.com, CB is for Centerbase. You'll be able to be able, like I said, download a copy of the presentation.
Thank you
And
so
thank
much,
you
everybody,
everyone
for
for coming.
joining. And thanks, Terrell, for this amazing presentation. All right,
Awesome.
everybody. Thank
All right.
you. Bye.